Here on this earth, we leave our mark of intelligence, progress, and the experiences each day brings us. Our every moment is influenced by our surroundings, and so in return, we alter our environment. In a way, we are our own environment, because we are the change, the constant alteration of each tree and stone. And because of this, Earth is our home. Food, water, air, and shelter are our basic needs provided by the Earth. With such an abundant planet, we have satisfied these needs and progressed through technology, the application of knowledge for practical purposes, creating advanced structures beneficial for our own survival. With the first known man-made structures appearing in 4850 BC Europe, and the first urban establishments such as Peru's 3500 BC Plaza, we acknowledge our early advancements. These structures left behind by ancient civilizations tell their fascinating stories. What will our story look like hundreds of years from today? Or even as short as 5 years? According to the U.S. Census Bureau and UN population estimates, we can acknowledge the significant growth in the recent century. With our population less than 500 million in 1050 and still only a few 1 billion in the early 1800s, we conclude that the other additional 6 billion came from a period of exponential growth. With this in mind, can we consider the Earth's carrying capacity? Scientist Edward O. Wilson of Harvard University estimates his calculations on Earth's available resources. He estimates the Earth's capacity is 9 to 10 billion. Today, at over 7 billion occupants, do we consider the fragile state of our planet or the footprint we're making upon it? Today, prior civilization structures still remain. To think comparatively of what our generation and its overwhelming population will leave behind should fuel our generation to acknowledge our impact on the environment through our consumption, buildings, and mentality of our surroundings. So why are these modern-day structures abandoned, and how does our mentality and perception of them affect the environment and community we live in? Mentality is a state of mind. It's something that history and experiences shape, and it becomes a part of our character through ideals and actions. Why we leave these structures behind could be for many reasons. One of the more theoretical reasons, however, is sprawl. In 2002, a report titled Measuring Sprawl and Its Impact, Smart Growth America defines sprawl as the outcome of 4 related factors: low residential density, a poor mix of homes, jobs, and services, limited activity centers and downtown areas, and a limited option for walking or biking. To advance in my understanding of these empty structures and how our relationship with them can change a community through an occurrence of sprawl, I contacted UWM Professor Dr. Arjat Sen for his expertise on the subject. Teaching architecture and urban planning with a research focus on urban ethnic, space, and environmental behavior studies, I hope for some additional information on the concept of urban flight and sprawl.
One of the things that I do is I teach a fieldwork class. We do a lot of field-based studies. And in summer, there is a fieldwork class that we have every year, 5 weeks long. And this year, we are going to a neighborhood called Washington Park, which is west on North Avenue. Now, Washington Park was built by working-class immigrants in the early 1900s, between 1890 to 1920s. It was a thriving working-class neighborhood. There were places where there were factories nearby, so people would walk to their place of work. Well, the industrial economy completely changed, and that happened. Automobile became very important for us, and there was a tremendous amount of white flight, which basically took people over to the suburbs. As a result, what happened in Washington Heights is you have a building stock which doesn't necessarily always respond to the culture and the economic needs of the community. For instance, you have houses, but you don't have places to work. And so people are either taking bus or driving or whatever. You have houses which are really made for home ownership, but a lot of people are not homeowners. So what ends up happening over time is the facelessness of the users require architects to design in such a way that buildings can transform itself, that it can be flexible enough to accommodate different cultural needs, economic needs, and so on. And most of our problems of cities is the physical structure of the city is built for, 100 years ago, and it may not necessarily be useful today.
While both sources, Professor Arjit Sen and Smart Growth America, defined similar causes of sprawl, such as change in residential population and transportation needs, Arjit Sen also addressed poor urban planning, such as not having stable balance between jobs and people's homes. This unstable balance, solvable with introduction to cars, actually later became even more prominent as people expanded the distance between jobs in the city and available homes in the country. Contemporary suburban America supports Arjit Sen, reading, "The full blossoming of suburban ideal occurred after World War I, as the arrival of the automobile allowed the suburbs to develop a completely independent landscape that was no longer an adjunct of the older central city." So because of cars, we have a freedom with our residential choices. But how much more expanding can we do until the demand no longer exists, or the suburbs become undesirable or vacant? Why are we still constructing new buildings if they are not contracted to be built? Arjit Sen discusses a main reason for the architecture and construction business's mass production.
It's important that what we design should respond to the desires of the people. But if you look at a contemporary economy, most of the buildings that are done are really built for people who are faceless. So in other words, if you see the construction system, a developer comes in and he or she builds something with the help of an architect or an architectural firm. They might sometimes have actual people who want to live in their residence, or mostly they're nameless, faceless demographic numbers. And that creates a huge problem for the design of buildings because we don't exactly know who we are building for. Number two is, even if we know who we are building for, the economy is such that there is huge turnover of owners. So for instance, I own something, then I sell it and I give it to someone else. That kind of turnover of property, which is actually not the case in the past, people would live in the same place for a long time, makes it also very difficult for us to actually design for individuals and very specific clients. So that's the problem, actually.
Now aware of the faceless consumer, I notice many examples locally, such as vacant, newly built housing and storefronts. Frequently, these properties are constructed close to each other or near other empty structures. This construction for the faceless customer occurs due to the potential market, but how large can we estimate and assume the market will be? BBC News reports of a ghost town in China. In Qinggong, there are more than 100,000 new apartments with no occupants. It was designed as an overspill point for Kunming, a city of nearly 6.5 million people. After the failed attempt of filling the new city, the issues of the geographic location came to surface. Not only did the developers risk building an entire English-inspired city at once without original occupants, they failed to consider the faceless consumer's economic needs. Such as a job near home, it has been hurt by poor transit infrastructure. Unfortunately, it was built in the middle of nowhere. The city is a virtual ghost town, with empty shops and unused roads, according to an article in Business Insider. Seeing Beijing's ghost town along with several others, such as Ireland and Spain's, I question why we continue to build for the faceless consumers instead of waiting for a need or even an interest of a customer to avoid these massive towns of waste. After continued research, I discovered I had failed to consider the workforce behind these large budget projects. A good majority of China's GDP, gross domestic product, comes from the investment of infrastructure. BBC reports it as, it is said to have built the equivalent of Rome every 2 months in the past decade, and with such a large pool of labor it is harder to put the brakes on when growth slows and outstrips demand. Kevin Doran adds, China has 7 to 8 million people entering the workforce every year. You have to give something to do in order to retain the legitimacy of the government. Here in the U.S., construction is a major employment opportunity. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as of March 2014, construction supplies 5,964,000 jobs. While empty buildings cause distress on communities and their environment, construction contributes a multitude of jobs each year. So what if instead of avoiding new construction and having empty buildings affect a community, we focus on alternative solutions that benefit both our environment and economy? Beneficial alternatives include renovation, alteration, more sustainable designs, and construction intentions. Smart Growth started in 1996. The Environmental Protection Agency joined efforts with over 40 nonprofit government organizations, coming together to create solutions to our inefficient home building and community making methods. Discussing the importance of balance between available housing and construction, Smart Growth strives to protect the environment while stimulating an economic growth. Their strategy is mixed land, the combining of residential, commercial, and recreational areas. This strategy both reduces impact on the environment as well as our dependence on cars due to the elimination of travel distance from city to suburb. Mixed land is also economically beneficial. When locating commercial areas close to residential areas, property values increase, helping local tax receipts, which then proceed to benefit local businesses. Due to these causational relationships, Smart Growth's strategy of mixed land would seem to be successful. However, after learning of China and other countries' ghost towns, the products of building for the faceless consumer, I'm skeptical of Smart Growth's introduction of housing into a city landscape. I feel it might just produce more vacant housing. Even if the market for these homes were strong enough, where would they go in an already structure-covered landscape? Architect Dong-Hoon Kim's micro-housing concept could potentially be the key to the future of mixed land. In response to New York City's housing crisis, he said, "There is a demonstrated need for micro-housing, but with a lack. By utilizing the existing infrastructure and tweaking the current zoning envelope possibilities, this project is trying to achieve a maximum number of dwelling units within a minimum need for demolition." Kim is driven to create affordable and environmental dwelling spaces, whether they make up the top of a pre-existing building or involve renovation of old factories and parking garages. While Kim is developing new housing proposals, others, such as Omar Hasmoglu, a student at Sweden's UMA Institute of Design, is working on new designs to rid of these abandoned structures by completely removing them. Asmoglu's design of the Uro, a robot that recycles concrete in an energy-efficient manner, separates the rebar, debris, and concrete on the spot for reuse. Not only is this machine an environmentally friendlier alternative than the landfill, but it has the potential to completely change the construction industry, as it is another solution to, in a way, recycle these structures. The solutions are evident. We can eliminate these structures through renovation, elimination, and the combining of city and suburbs to make mixed land. Ideally, these are all solutions that can save a community. However, would the effects of such urban flight and community deterioration even exist if our mentality and knowledge of the structures changed? Arjit Sen shares his observations of America's mentality concerning the empty buildings, and how our visual ideals fuel the negative idea of these structures.
Empty buildings are symbolically more powerful than they actually are. And I think what has happened as an American cultural imaginary, in the American cultural imaginary, when you have a boarded up building, it has multiple messages that it sends to people. First, in the level of community, it's a message of low rental and low property values. It sends a message that this community is somehow not economically well enough or something. And that message is not always right. It's the mythology that this empty building does. For an individual, at an individual level, the message that it sends out, and I'll say it's incorrect, is the message of lack of individual responsibility, that you're not keeping your house up well. But if you look at a case, an example of a wheelchair-bound veteran who is below poverty level, the boarded up window of the house in which he lives is not because he's irresponsible or not physically, it's simply because he's physically and economically unable to keep up the window as it should be. So I think the myth is too over encompassing, which stops us from seeing the reality of individual cases. And that is a huge issue, I think, especially in communities where there are boarded up buildings, because we in one stroke judge the community and the people in there, never understanding the individual reasons for this. Why do we have boarded up windows? And I think one of the reasons we have boarded up, other than the fact that some of these older neighborhoods are socially and culturally and economically very different, so some of these spaces becomes redundant. The other reason is we have created for ourselves a culture of throwaway waste. So we make a building, then we don't need it, we just leave it boarded up or we tear it down, and I think we are beginning to understand, because we have to understand that we can't keep doing that. And reuse of a building or building rehabilitable spaces is central to the sustainability dictum. Not really recycle. You can't tear buildings down and make new ones. And so one of the things you'll see in those neighborhoods are that all the storefronts, public buildings may be boarded up or may not actually look very new. So in that way, because of the structural economic conditions of these neighborhoods, yes, we end up having visual blight.
Visual blight is like urban sprawl. It pulls a population away from a developed community or neighborhood, causing deterioration of an urban area. It's simply the action of a resident to relocate what seems a healthier urban community. This action, however, has an effect that encourages others to do the same. The cycle caused simply by negative association of an empty building can be discontinued with the change of mentality towards the structures, resulting in a potentially healthier and lively community. Arjit Sen proposes to instead perceive such visual blight as a landscape or neighborhood story.
We all know how to read text. We all know how to hear sound of people, like language. But buildings, the built environment, is a form of language that communicates with us, lets us communicate with others, and then let us communicate with our past. So I think one of the things which I think your project would be is, that's what I really think is great, is to be able to read the landscape. It's not that big a deal, we all know it, because we grow up doing it. To overtly read the landscape to understand culture. If we can do that, I think we'll have a much better environment around us. That's the only thing I have to say.
Because we are the ones to alter the environment, we must take responsibility for it and how we expand into it using its resources and land. With ancient civilization structures leaving their mark and telling their stories, we too must take into consideration and remember the impact of our homes and our structures and what state one day we will eventually bring the planet to. Changing our perception of old, boarded-up buildings will not only be beneficial for the environment, but also for our own communities. Through renovation and other sustainable construction designs, we will find these empty buildings full of potential. How we change our ideas and overall perspective of the environment will be the ultimate change for the future. Buildings will tell our story of consumption and our culture and lifestyles years from now. With a change of mentality by reading the landscape, we can take down the boards, allowing for a more sustainable and overall healthy community.